Hey everyone, and welcome to an edition of Reading Through History student-produced knockoff video. This project was produced by Dharma Avelar and myself, Jonathan Fan, and we are both students enrolled in Peter Bocconi's AP U.S. History class at San Marino High School. In today's video, we will be focused on the contributions of the Chinese railroad workers in the construction of the Transcontinental Railroad. But before we get to the contributions of the Chinese railroad workers, we have to establish some historical context. During and after the American Civil War, westward migration was growing ever more popular in the minds of Americans. The new westward territories provided access to new natural and mineral resources and a place for some to seek religious refuge. This prompted new legislation that promoted western transportation and economic development. One of these legislations was the Pacific Railway Acts, which officially stated that Congress authorized the construction of a transcontinental railroad and provided government bonds and land grants to the railroad companies. The path of the Transcontinental Railroad was split between two companies, the Central Pacific Railway and the Union Pacific Railway. These two paths would eventually reach a meeting point, which is now modern Promontory Summit, Utah. For this video, we'll be focusing our attention on the Central Pacific Railway, since that is where the majority of the Chinese railroad workers were. Now, the construction of the Transcontinental Railroad required a lot of workers, but there was an abundant amount of Chinese immigrants looking for work in America. This is due to the fact that there were numerous domestic issues in China, such as a lack of available jobs, starvation, overpopulation, and no opportunities for growth. Many of the Chinese immigrants were enticed by the gold rush and came to America to make enough money to support their families back in China. As the excitement of the California gold rush faded, Chinese immigrants turned to new job opportunities, which included the construction of the Transcontinental Railroad. The Central Pacific Railway started construction in Sacramento, California in 1863. The pathway was to head east and cross the Sierra Nevada mountain range towards the meeting point. At first, this workforce only consisted of white European workers. Chinese immigrants were disregarded because it was believed that they were too fragile to work on the railroads. But due to the lack of available workers and a strict timeline, the first group of 21 Chinese railroad workers were hired in 1864. And by 1865, there was an average total of 20,000 Chinese railroad workers, making about 90% of the total workforce of the Central Pacific Railway. As the construction continued east, the new Chinese railroad workers were generally tasked with the most dangerous and labor-intensive jobs. These included grading the route, which was leveling out the land and clearing debris from the track, and detonating a variety of explosives to create new tunnels and clear large debris of granite. The typical work schedule for these workers was sunrise to sunset for 6 days of the week, with some meal breaks scattered throughout the day. At the end of the day, the workers would reside in temporary improvised camps that were close to the tracks of the railroad. The Chinese railroad workers used many methods to keep their morales up after the long days of work. They had access to opium and smoking pipes that helped them relax during the night, and they also managed to recreate certain sources of traditional Chinese cuisine and tea, which helped them feel more at home. In 1866, the Central Pacific Railway reached the foothills of the Sierra Nevada mountain range. Construction slowed down dramatically due to the sharp weather changes, harsh environmental factors, and dangerous working conditions. But through perseverance, the Central Pacific Railway was able to make it past the mountain range and head straight to the meeting point. Now, don't think the construction of the Central Pacific Railway was easy, because it was in fact the opposite of easy. There were many struggles and challenges that had to be overcome, especially by the Chinese railroad workers. One was the sheer amount of deaths that occurred among the Chinese railroad workers. Out of the 20,000 workers, an estimated range of 15 to 1,200 Chinese railroad workers lost their lives during construction. These causes of death range from explosion accidents, avalanches, landslides, poor working conditions, and diseases. The Central Railroad workers also suffered from racial discrimination from the Central Pacific Railway Company. They were paid only $26 per month, which was about 30 to 50% less than their white co-workers were receiving for doing the same tasks. There were many cases of physical abuse from their superiors, and they were also provided poor living and working conditions. Some Chinese rail workers chose to accept those conditions and adapt, but the majority sought to bring reform and held a work strike. They left their tools on the tracks of the eastern Sierra Slope and stayed in their camps. They demanded for higher wages, better working conditions, and a reduction in work hours. The strike lasted a little over a week because the Central Pacific Railway officials cut all food supplies to the Chinese camps. Although they were forced back to work due to starvation, working conditions did improve after the strike. The final injustice was done to the Chinese rail workers was that they did not receive recognition for the completion of the Transcontinental Railroad. At the meeting point, the golden spike resembled the connection between the Central Pacific Railroad and the Union Pacific Railroad companies. On that day, the famous Transcontinental Railroad completion photo was taken, which consists of many workers celebrating in front of the two trains meeting together on the track. But not one single Chinese railroad worker was present or thanked for their sacrifices. In fact, they would not even be recognized for their contributions until many years after the completion of the Transcontinental Railroad. There are only a few official records of the Chinese railroad workers, so most of this information was gathered through family members. Descendants of the Chinese railroad workers were told their stories, and they were passed down through familial generations. One of these stories was about Lim Lip Hong. In 1855, Lim Lip Hong was a 12-year-old Chinese immigrant who, like many, sought after work to provide back to his family. Lim immigrated to America in search of fortune in the California Gold Rush, but 9 years later, Lim found work in the Transcontinental Railroad on the Central Pacific Railway. Through hard work, Lim was eventually promoted to the position of crew head. This was extremely rare to see a minority being promoted to a higher position at this time. Lim, as a crew head, was in charge of recruiting and overseeing the workers for certain sections of the Sierra Nevada Railway. Now, what were the effects of the Transcontinental Railroad? The short-term effect was that it allowed Americans to travel nearly from coast to coast in a few days' time. This led to the long-term effect, which was promotion in trade, increased prosperity, and highlighted expansion, which boosted America's national power and identity with other countries around the world. To conclude this video, we would just like to say that America was founded by immigrants, and through these types of struggles from the past, we learned the essence of what is added to the ever-growing culture of modern America. Thank you for taking your time to watch this Reading Through History knockoff video about the Chinese Transcontinental Railroad workers.